not morning for Tobias, or I imagine most of you are watching. Hi, welcome to Rasa Office Hours, where we answer your questions about Rasa, whatever they may happen to be. And today I'm here with Tobias, and do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Rachel. So I'm Tobias. I'm a software engineer at Rasa. So mostly working on the backend side of Rasa, also doing a bit of DevOps. Yeah, working mostly in Rasa open source recently. So the rule policy, for example, or the new form refactoring, which we did for Rasa open source too.
Sorry, I did things backwards. um, if you all heard a horrible echo, that was me. Tobias is fine. Um, yeah, and it looks like YouTube has not started quite yet. There it goes. Okay. So while we are waiting for some questions, what was your favorite feature that was introduced in 2.0? And you can't say rules because I know you worked on that. Something other than rules.
I really like the autoconfig feature. I think we kind of shipped a very minimal slice for it in Rasa open source 2, but there's really cool stuff we can do with it. For example, kind of determining the configuration based on the amount of training data or the language, so that there's just a huge room for improvements there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for folks who haven't used 2.0 yet, or I guess 2.x because we're now on 2.1, this is when you start a new Rasa assistant. You don't have to specify anything in the configuration file. It's all commented out and it happens for you. And it hopefully just works is the goal. Okay, and it looks like we don't have any questions quite yet. So why don't we hop over to the forum and see what folks have to say. All right. Over to Rasa open source. See if we've got some open questions. Any particular things calling out to you?
Handling data in action or Rasa store tracker to Redis cluster. That's good.
Yeah. Handling data in action. Okay, so we have, it looks like a function that they've written. They're trying to validate a time slot. Chung says hi, Tobias. Hi, Chung. Welcome to the stream. And then they're getting entity details from the tracker, stores the history of the conversation, and the entity is called time. Then they're looking for, they want to check if the date is before today, and that should throw an error.
So yeah, it seems like we are inside a Rasa form. So they're using the validate underscore time kind of format. So I think they're in a form. I'm not exactly sure actually how the duckling time format looks like, but I assume it's some string which they're already passing. If they, I assume that parse duckling time already passes it to your date time object. So then they should be able to just use Python to compare this datetime object to the current one.
Yeah,
It might run into
need...
problems with time zones, but I don't think that's the issue here. Actually, looks really good what they're doing. So they return time colon none, right, in case the parsing fails. So this means the slot is invalid, and they kind of notify the form that this slot should be requested again. So this looks actually super good.
Yeah. We're specifically looking for dates before today. I think there's something in date time.
Yeah, for sure.
This library.
Yeah. I think it's even part of Python, right?
Was it built in?
Yeah. I think you can even use greater than and smaller than, compare them. It might even work.
So we'll have to pop in the forum to answer the question. It's the 20th, right? And while we were talking about that, looks like we have some questions that came in. So he wants to know, how many entities can we make safely with Rasa?
Depends a bit whether they are machine like entities which have to be trained upon, right? Or whether they are entities which are extracted by things like duckling. The problem is, I think, when you have very many which you're training using, for example, diet as an entity extractor, then I think you run into the risk that they either like you can't distinguish between them properly. So this could be a problem, but in theory, there's no limit.
I would say if you're training them yourselves, I guess like at least 10 examples if you're going to have a lot of entities. And I would, personally, if I had more than like 100, I'd sit down and really be like, do these all need to be separate entities? Are they different enough? I guess it depends on your project, right?
I would also assume it's hard to maintain the training data then, right? Because if you annotate in a new training data, you always have to annotate all of the entities. So if you miss them, you're kind of teaching the model to unlearn this as an entity. So if you have like 1,000 entities, then I guess it's becoming really, really hard to remember all of them and to know when to use which entity annotation.
So no firm limit, but it depends on your tolerance for being very thorough, I guess. Trung says, ooh, something in German. I think I have a podcast.
Yeah, so there's been a podcast. So I've been part of a podcast, actually a German podcast. I think it feels like a year ago, probably this year. Yeah. So it was about Rasa and explaining Rasa to the German podcast community. Thanks a lot, by the way, for the compliment.
And then Sahib, so this is a follow-up on the question about how many entities. My code is not picking entities. I made an example in the LU data, but the tracker is getting a slot. The tracker's get slot is saying none entity extracted. The code is not picking up entity, even though there are examples of it in the NLU, and the tracker slot is just set to none.
So a very easy test would be to just pass the same NLU message as is in your training data. Then you could just see if the logic works. And if this works, but it doesn't kind of generalize to other examples, then you have to add more training data.
So hopefully that gives you a direction to go in. Onbar1907 says, hey guys, how can we debug the code of custom actions? I'm having trouble developing my custom actions because of that. I tried following a tutorial, but I still couldn't debug. So I'm guessing that this is when your action relies on information coming in from your tracker store, for example.
Yeah, because like the rest of a custom action is just regular Python code, right? Or whatever your language your SDK is in. So you can just unit test that as usually. Regarding the tracker, you can actually create the tracker on your own, for example, in a unit test and pass it in. I definitely see the point that kind of constructing the tracker in the way it has to look without kind of knowing Rasa in depth is complicated. So yeah, kind of some framework here. I think there have been requests for exactly that, kind of having a framework to easily test that. Yeah, it would be cool if there's some library or something around that. Yeah. It'd be interesting to know like which case you exactly wanna test, to be honest.
Yeah, if you've got more information on Bart, we would. And just to sort of reiterate, you can make a custom tracker if you know you're going to want to always run the same tests. Might be a little bit involved. Or if you're just checking, like if it works with a specific slot value, you can write a test where you pass in that slot value.
Yeah, judging on the YouTube comments, you're also trying to debug them, right? So what you also could do is just add a print statement at the start of your custom action. You just print out the domain and the tracker, so you know kind of what you have, and then kind of try to make your way through it by using these print statements.
Definitely something that I do when I need to know what's going on. Suggestion, Rasa, make sure you, when you're in the actions, you do -VV, so you get a lot of information to help you debug. Okay, Madan Mina says, I want to know more about augmentation. I'm guessing that's data augmentation.
Yeah, seems so. So I think the only place I know within Rasa where we do augmentation is for stories. So we randomly concatenate them to create more stories and kind of to improve the training of the models. Ideally, you add a lot of real life stories. I think that's definitely better because then you have real data by actual users instead of kind of these artificially constructed stories. So I would not suggest to kind of, leverage the augmentation too much. It's a nice thing if you don't have too much training data, but ideally collect stories, conversations from real users.
Yeah, definitely. Like maybe a little bit to give you a little bit of a what's called a warm start, just so you have like some examples. But ideally, like by the time a lot of people are using your assistant, the majority of your training data comes from people who are actually assistant and you've just retrained using.
Yeah, and you will hopefully discover a lot of new use cases for your assistant as well, right? So this is exactly what Rasa X is for, and where it's really great at, that you can actually look at your conversations with users. I mean, I ran into that myself, right? You create a bot and you know exactly how it's supposed to be used, and you're even thinking of edge cases, and then you give it to one real user or just your neighbor, and they're completely gonna crush it in a second.
Yeah, I think we've all run into that at one point or another. Question from Trung. Rasa is quite server heavy. Is there a trick to work around it?
Depends a bit what server heavy means. So in general, you can run Rasa open source also locally, right? By the way, also Rasa X if you want to use that.
Also, I just realized when we were going through this code, I did not have it showing on screen. I'm so sorry. This is the question we were looking at the forum. Sorry. So you were saying your server code.
So yeah, the only other thing, maybe Trung, you want to kind of elaborate a bit more on what you mean by server heavy. What I could imagine it could mean is that Rasa is heavily configured by using the CLI and configuration files. It's kind of not so much intended at the moment, I think, kind of having this Python API, as you would have, for example, for TensorFlow or scikit-learn, where you don't have like the CLI or configuration files, but you actually write Python code. But yeah, happy to hear or to have more input on this question.
And if you're referring to running multiple servers, I think one of the changes that was really nice in 2.0 is moving forms out of actions. So if you just have a form, you no longer have to run an action server. Could be what you mean.
Although yeah, exactly. It makes it super easy to get started with forms.
We'll see if there's some follow-up in a bit. Pramar says, interactive chat and creating stories in Rasa X doesn't sometimes show message from the bot. Is Rasa X still not compatible with Rasa 2.0 on local mode?
So we had a problem with Rasa X being not compatible with Rasa open source 2.0.0. So if you have this like absolutely earliest version of Rasa open source 2, I'd suggest to update, but it should definitely be compatible with Rasa X also in local mode. So we got unit tests and CI tests for this setup. And if something as essential as talking to your bot would fail, I'm pretty sure we would already know it and have fixed it. So yeah, I recommend you to update to the latest version, and I hope this fixes it. Otherwise, please create an issue on GitHub so you can fix it ASAP.
Yeah, and there's I put the link on the screen to where to put your issue on our GitHub. Madame says, I'm facing an issue where if I add more augmentation, I end up failing my existing stories. For e.g., if my model's working with approximately 60 augmentations, everything works, but if I add more, it starts breaking existing stories. Plus, my model is not stable. It breaks with the same config when run in CI/CD pipeline.
So maybe we split up that question into parts, because it seems to be two things for me. So I think what happens in the first case is that actually so what augmentation does is it takes your training stories and randomly glues them together to try to create longer stories. And I assume that you have a longer story in your training data, which is colliding with one of these augmented ones. In that case, I would just disable augmentation. There should be a flag for Rasa train, if it's -- augmentation, but just out of my head at this point.
Yeah, -- augmentation.
Yeah, I would try setting that to 0. And I'd be really curious what error you're running into in the CI/CD. So what's your error message there? What's happening?
So if you have more information on your error message, that would be helpful. Jackson Carell says, kind of an NLP question. Some new types of zero-shot learning, like pattern exploiting training and Hugging Face's zero-shot pipeline, look impressive. Is there a good way to integrate these pipelines with Rasa? I'm not familiar with either of these.
I would have actually handed over this question to you, Rachel, because I think you're the way better person to answer that one.
Yeah. So again, I'm not familiar with either of these particular projects, but my in general, zero-shot learning has a pre-trained model behind it, and you could absolutely find a way to integrate a pre-trained model into your pipeline. But I don't know enough about these specific models. We do have a you can use Hugging Face with Rasa, and we have some utilities. I don't know what you'd call them, utilities. They fit together with code that we wrote. So that might already cover the zero shot, the Hugging Face zero shot one. I'm not super familiar with these. Yeah. Jack Martin says, I had a professor in undergrad called Jack Martin. Rachel, what's the best way to join your team? Would you like to know any of your most recent, would like to know any of your most recent most like NLP papers we should check out from EMNLP 20, for example? Best way to join the Rasa team is to submit an application. The docs. Here we go. So it is rasa.com/careers/#jobs. And we have following positions open right now. I guess probably my most favorite recent ACL paper is the one that Emily Bender and her co-author wrote on understanding, and I think it's called like Climbing Towards Understanding or something. It was one of the best papers from NACL, and just sort of talking about what the state of the field is in a position paper about what's able to work on. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. We read it in the reading group. What about you, Tobias? Do you have a favorite recent paper? I know like reading research papers isn't like a huge part of your job function, but
unfortunately not. Yeah. Actually, in the early Rasa days, we used to do. I used to read some research papers. So we did like have knowledge sharings, and also engineers were kind of more involved into reading research papers. But yeah, there's a lot to do at the moment, so I haven't had a look on any research papers, unfortunately.
Whatever the most recent one that the Rasa team put out was. I don't actually know off the top of my head. I don't remember.
Or Vincent's word embeddings, what lies?
Oh yeah, I'm an author on that. It was definitely the word embeddings one. It's about what lies, which is a library for visualizing word embeddings. Jackson has another question. Are there any thoughts about whether these types of semi-supervised learning are good for virtual assistant use cases, or should I stick with more traditional NLU pipelines in Rasa? So this is like the zero-shot learning question continued. I'm a freelance chatbot developer working with a client making a bot that's sort of a mix between a virtual assistant and a piece of interactive fiction. Oh, that's fun. Like it depends, right? So if you're using, this is just my personal stance here. If you're using a model that is pre-trained on some corpus of text, and the goal is to reduce the amount of work that you need to do, I think it can work if you are pretty certain that the content of the corpus of text fits with your needs, you know what I mean? And the thing that I would be most leery of is really any abusive, or I mean, a lot of these models are trained on language from the internet that's like straight up racist, straight up sexist, and you wouldn't want to use a model that has, strong negative associations with neutral words, for example. So I think it can work. I think you got to be careful. And I think like a fiction, playful game sort of setting is the type of place where I think it's most likely to work okay. But yeah, I would be.
Yeah, just absolutely the same, to be honest. So if it's some actually like critical things for customers, I wouldn't use it because I would be just too afraid. Yeah, for fiction, I mean, it's just too hard to kind of detect this bias, right? And like to know when it actually comes out. So to actually prevent it seems very, very, very risky.
Yeah, but I mean, give it a shot. Let us know how it goes, I guess.
Maybe put a big disclaimer above it.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And I also probably wouldn't. I might use it as part of my NLU pipeline. I probably wouldn't use it to generate text. My stance at the moment. Okay, so the back to the Benjamina's question about the CI/CD breaking on a different system. I get a different model when the model is trained through CI/CD. My model is working if I train it locally, but not if it's created through CI/CD, though the config is the same. Not working means some stories fail. Do you recommend that we do not use augmentation much? Okay, so I'm going to do it. Let's see what those first two questions. Are you setting your random seeds? I think would be my first thing I would ask. You're getting like a different model and you want the exact same model.
I mean, if these stories rely on machine learning policies, right, then it can definitely be, if there's not enough training data and it's not really robust, then I could imagine this happening. But it's weird that apparently it seems like it's working repeatedly in local mode, but not in the CI, which seems very awkward. So usually there's no difference, right? So even if you do it with a different Python version, there shouldn't be anything affected. So I'd probably try adding more training data, to be honest. If you heavily rely on augmentation, okay, then it can definitely happen that some things are glued together differently, I guess. Woba would definitely be, so a researcher, Woba would definitely be a better person to speak to that, about that. Yeah, and regarding, I think the next question is also like, also regarding augmentation, I would usually try to stick with conversations provided by users and learning from that as much as possible. So kind of we kind of coined this term CDD, so conversation-driven development. So I would try to use as much real-life data as possible instead of kind of relying on artificial generated data.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like for this use case, they switched from a lot of handwritten stories to a lot of augmentation. And that could be, especially if you still have the handwritten stories, I might back to them. Or, of course, using stories that are generated from users. And if you're using Rasa X, you can just, save an interaction as a story to your training data.
In Rasa X, it's super nice, right? You see this conversation, you can fix some annotations on the fly, and then you just add it just to your training data. So you don't actually have to write them manually, because you can see that this is super painful, right? But just using Rasa X for this should hopefully make it a lot less painful.
We hope. Sorry, I hope nobody heard the leaf blowers. Jack Martin wants to know, any best tips for conducting research paper reading groups? How do you make reading groups fun? What's the strategy you use to follow and read research papers? That's a broad question. What are some good strategies for reading groups? I think a sort of common one is to have a reading group that's a set group of people. So the Rasa reading group is very much like not the way that reading groups at most research groups work. So the way that it usually works is you have, your group of people. Everybody, signs up for a week or, bi-weekly or however you're doing it and picks their paper. And then on the week that they're doing a paper, they'll put together, everyone reads the paper. Usually the people who aren't presenting don't read it in quite the same depth. The person who is presenting will put together like slides walking through it, going through the equations, maybe like digging a little bit more into the related work. Usually it's going to be a topic that's more related to their research. And then folks just sort of go through the slides and talk about stuff and be like, oh, I don't like this, or like, oh, this is clever. I guess if you're meeting in person, bring snacks. That always helps people show up. I don't know. That's sort of like the usual way that reading groups go. At some point, I mean, depending on the field, reading research may not always be the most fun thing, and that's okay. That's why it's a job. But Mina says, I'm using random seed, and it's the same in CI/CD and locally.
I mean, that should actually exclude any room for error, right? I think at this point it might be best kind of to create an issue on GitHub, to be honest. Because it seems to be easier to reproduce or try to reproduce and see what the actual error is. It would be super interesting. Maybe we forget to kind of apply this seed somewhere. I hope not. But this would be a bug which would be nice to uncover.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you might get you'd get there could be some difference based on hardware, because it sounds like you're running it on different hardware. Especially if you're using I think CUDA it has some things that are just not replicable, and you can't set a seed with them. Yeah, I follow bug.
Please, yeah.
Right. Ahmad says, how can I download the data in the NLU inbox in Rasa X as a CSV file?
Not at all at the moment. I believe, yeah, you can use the API actually and kind of write your own Python script to go through the API, download the content. So there should be JSON, and then you could convert this to CSV. The endpoints are documented in an API spec, so that's kind of like a public official format. It should be in our docs actually. So you can actually use this to see the endpoint, the URL, and how to authenticate and everything. Yeah.
Oh, one sec, sorry.
But that's Rasa, I guess, right?
Rasa Open Source, so it's the Rasa X.
Yeah. There should be. Kind of feel like a newbie with a new documentation myself, to be honest.
Rasa Open Source. And for folks that are just coming to Rasa, when we did the Rasa 2.0 launch, there was a huge update to the docs that went around with it. Oh, along with it, so stuff has moved around and looks, but much nicer.
Rachel, I just texted you the link to the page in Zoom.
Zoom. Hey. So it's rasa.com/docs/rasa-x/pages/http-API.
On the left side, somewhere, the
conversation.
Best easy, NLU data. But that's training. If you scroll a little bit further, for some reason the page isn't opening on my computer, so unfortunately I can't get ahead of you.
Get training examples?
I think you have to go further down.
Downloading training examples in a format.
That's still training data, I believe.
That
you can try using the search, maybe just search by logs.
Sorry. Just a sec. Back there. And this is an easy question to answer. Does Rasa have a speech-to-text API? No. But you're free. You know, that means you're free to use any speech-to-text API. New data. As you can see, it's a very fully featured API.
I'm really surprised that this endpoint must exist, right? So our front end is using it as well. So it must exist. But apparently, like either somebody did not document it.
Maybe getting the training examples? Sounds like it's not quite the same though.
Yeah, training examples are usually are training data.
Yeah, and not the ones provided by the user.
It is fetch messages in a conversation, but it's only for a single user. So you want to have all the messages within the NLU inbox, right? So, oh, there you go. Training and then messages, and there is an endpoint called get suggestions.
Okay.
So you could actually use this endpoint to retrieve all of the content of the NLU inbox. Maybe do it like in a paginated way to avoid having too large requests. So, and what you need for the authentication is a JWT token. So you can retrieve this. So there's also an endpoint for logging in, and then you get back an access token, which you can then pass any header for doing this request. Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to get this token.
So the answer is you can't do it through the API. You cannot do it in the interface right now, which I think is perhaps what we're looking for. Ahmed says, I meant the data provided by the users, the classified intent.
Yeah, that should actually be exactly this endpoint. So that should be the message with the classified intent. So that should be the entire information actually.
Hopefully this helps. And I think you could also just run, if you, well, it's from the inbox. I was going to say, you could also just run Rasa NLU in the shell if you wanted. That's not going to be quite the same. That would be if you pass things in classifications back.
I mean, a bit more scalable ways would maybe go to the database directly, or very, very sneaky would be to use the event broker to configure an additional queue for RabbitMQ, for example. And this would kind of put every event which happens within Rasa, put this in a queue, and then you can have like an event consumer, which, for example, saves it into a data lake. So the only issue is that you get all Rasa conversation events. So this would also include events like action executed, or like executed actions. But then you could just filter for user messages, and then you get the entire data.
And Aman says, I'd appreciate it if you could provide an easy way to download it in the UI. I would actually file that as a feature request.
I would like to know so what's your why behind this? So what's your use case? Because we're currently working on a feature actually helping you to prioritize annotations within the NLU inbox. Because at the moment it's like this huge inbox, right? Especially if there's a lot of conversations and a lot of incoming messages, it can get quite crowded, right? And there are some annotations which have a bigger impact than others, because some intents just need more attention, so to say. So we're currently working on a feature kind of giving you some priorities, giving you insights, and telling you basically, please annotate things for this intent next. So if maybe this kind of helps you more than actually having it downloadable as CSV. So it depends a bit on your use case. But yeah, please file an issue.
Here. Tobias, I know you can't say that. Oh, you've got YouTube open. Sarah's telling you where the bugs go. Other question. Jack asks, how is the Rasa team structured and what is the vision? That's a big question.
So I mean, we got a mission statement, right? So empower all makers to build AI assistants that work for everyone. So you can go to rasa.com/mission, where you can like both see this mission, but also our principles. And that's kind of our vision. So our mission is hopefully your vision. Yeah, exactly this one.
Oh wait, sorry, Sarah's still in front of it. There we go. Yeah. And then we have a structure. I think it's fairly straightforward if you work on the same stuff you're in the.
It's evolving, right? So as we grow, we kind of have to restructure everything. So when I started 2 years ago, the engineering team and the research team and customer success, everything was one team. Tom, our director of engineering, and Alan, our CTO, just assigned issues. But it was like a really tiny setup, right? And now we have like a special dedicated customer success engineering team. We got a research team. We got 2 engineering squads. So that's kind of like little cross-functional teams. So it evolved quite a lot. And issues are also no longer assigned top down, but the squads are quite self-responsible.
Hopefully that answers your question. And Madan says, a question regarding slot. If I am using 2 slots to make a fork, I'm using 2 slots to make a fork in a story greeting, and I have a few stories which only differ based on a value of 1 slot, and a few depend on the combination of 2 slots. If I use 1 slot in a few stories and 2 slots in others for greeting, I have to make a lot of tweaks in config to make it work. Is the above approach correct, or should I use 2 slots every time for consistency?
would be great actually to see this as like a full example and to think through it. I find it a bit hard now, like out of my head. But what you could try is kind of branch off and then try merging these branches back together. For example, using checkpoints. Or if it's, for example, an FAQ, then you could just have the FAQ isolated and you don't even need checkpoints. It depends a bit on your use case, I guess.
Yeah, I know that's sometimes be a frustrating answer to hear, but in this case, I think it's if you have more information you want to share, we can be more helpful. Tom says, I'm currently using speech to text from Azure to communicate with my Rasa bot, but you have to pay for Azure. Yeah. I'm trying to think of options. I mean, you could run an open spork. You can run an open source. There's no P in it. You could run an open source speech to text option like locally on your own server. Mozilla has one, right?
Yeah, but unfortunately I've never used them. The only thing I know is that the third party, like the paid services, are unfortunately way better.
Yeah, with speech to text, I mean, current methods, unfortunately, it really is just who has the most data to train with. But if it's like, a small project that you're doing for fun, CMU Sphinx is an open ASR. They do ASR, and it's free. It's also kind of old and very fiddly, but that could be an option. I think Mozilla has something like I mentioned.
You think it's possible to hack kind of Alexa, kind of to read it out to Alexa and then use the API of Amazon to retrieve the parsed text? That could be free. I'm not sure how scalable it is.
Possibly. I'm afraid I don't have a good recommendation there. Bobbin says the latest version is giving many problems. 2.1? Yeah, if you run into something specific, like something that you would expect to work that doesn't work, I would file a bug for it. And it does, like, if you mean the difference from 2.0 from 1.0, they are pretty different. Yeah, on our YouTube channel we have, I think it's still the featured video, the webinar where we go through all the differences. So that might be helpful to sort of go through what the differences are and some suggestions for migration. And if you're more familiar with 1.x, it might be.
I think also we kind of polished a lot of things in Rasa open source 2.1, right? So I think it should be definitely way more mature than the first 2.0 release. But yeah, happy to learn about any bugs and kind of address them.
Avinash says, what is Rasa doing about task switching between conversation? So it sounds like you're asking about someone's doing something in a conversation and in the middle they're like, oh, actually I want to open a new account, not check the balance of my existing account.
Well, our TED policy is actually exactly built for this, right? Kind of to address these cases where users do something which is not in your training data, but which your machine learning model, the TED policy, hopefully kind of is able to generalize from. So this is actually where all our, or like a lot of our research efforts are going into the TED policy and making that more robust. And yeah, I think they even published a couple of papers exactly on this use case. So we're actually trying to do a lot about it, but unfortunately it's a very, very hard topic.
It is. I'm trying to find some examples, and it's all just TED Talks. There we go. there's a good example here. Yeah, so this is an example where the assistant just sort of counts down, and then when the user interrupts it, it responds to that interruption and it continues counting down. And it goes into a lot more detail. And Vincent also has a really good series of algorithm whiteboard videos specifically on the TED policy. So I'd recommend checking those out. But yeah, when you're writing stories, if you have a memoization policy and people are exactly following those stories, they'll exactly follow those stories. But at each stage, we're guessing what we should do next, right? And the TED policy is one way of doing that guessing. So in theory, switching tasks, if you have an example of both tasks in your training data, should work pretty well. That's our hope. Chung says, what I want to say is that I can imagine many people would like to have Rasa as a speech assistant.
I think that the problem is that we are like Rasa is an open source framework, right? And for a speech assistant, we would need to provide some sort of trained model, which kind of would make us a service provider. So I think this could clash at some point. And I mean, also the problem with a speech assistant is that we could obviously provide models, but then kind of covering all languages on Earth would be quite difficult. And just covering English would be nice for any English speakers out there, but for the rest of the world, it wouldn't be. So it would be very unfair in a way. And also, I think just due to our size, you can really have to prioritize. But I agree, it would be super cool.
Building and maintaining a speech API. You mentioned English speakers, like even just for American English speakers is a whole company. that's a lot. But I agree, speech is great. All right. And Avinash, who asked about switching tasks, I'm gonna go check out the talk on the whiteboard. So if you find them. Dinku says, what's the best option for detecting e-commerce product names that are typically long? Because the names are long, the user might not even give the full product name in the appearance.
So that's actually a perfect use case for our entity extractors. So you got pre-trained entity extractors within Rasa open source, like backlinks, for example, for numbers or spacey. But we also, you can also train on your own entities provided by yourself within your NLU training data. So I would just suggest you to give a lot of examples, especially of these kind of shortened versions and the longer versions in your NLU training data. And then it should be pretty reliable in picking that out. Actually. So entity extraction is something which usually works really, really well in my experience.
Yeah. And if like there's a long product name that's pretty consistently referred to using a shorter product name, would that be a good place for synonyms?
Yeah, or even regex features, right? So you could also define a regex for product names, because I mean, although they might be shortened and slightly different, I think it's a pretty limited amount of possible values. But I would probably just provide like a lot of training data first, and then see maybe if regexes can help.
I guess the nice thing about e-commerce product names is they're probably already in like a nicely formatted, computer readable format.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully that helps, Dingu. Enrique says, how to know the right version of TensorFlow and TensorFlow add-on dependencies when installing Rasa with pip. It has changed with Rasa version 2.1.1 and pip doesn't find a match by default.
Okay, there should definitely be a match. What I could imagine is that it's kind of conflicting things on your machine, but then pip would just reinstall it usually. I'm wondering, are you on Windows or which operating system are you on? So you should, so we got automated unit tests for Windows and Ubuntu set up. So it should work. I'm just there must be something in the configuration or like in the properties of your system which kind of doesn't make certain packages available to you. So either you're using a newer or older Python version maybe, or a specific CPU architecture maybe which is not supported. Yeah, curious.
Yeah, if you have more details and that would be helpful. Dingu says, could you compare regex entity extractor for lookup versus training on the diet classifier for entity extraction of these e-commerce product names? And then Todd has an example of a product name, Sony WH-1000XM4.
How would you compare them, Rachel? What do you think is the best approach to this?
Yeah, so my general advice is to, as much as possible, avoid using regular expressions unless the regular expression is like extremely simple. And the reason is because I have shot myself in the foot thoroughly multiple times with regular expressions that were almost what I wanted, and all my test cases were right, but not in the future when I was trying to do more complicated things with them. So the regular expression is like, I don't know, it's like a, I'm trying to think of a good, it's like a whisk, right? Like a hand whisk, right? It works, it's a little bit fiddly, it takes some time. Whereas diet is like one of those big commercial mixers where you just dump stuff in and it does it for you. So big benefits of using something like diet. It's multitask learning, so you get multiple things out. You get the intents and the entities, and you need less training data for that than if you were training those two things separately. So it's a little bit more data efficient. And also, regexes are like very structured, right? They'll always match the same thing, whereas something like diet is going to be a little bit more flexible, right? It's going to be able to, extrapolate a little bit better. It's going to be able to sort of handle related terms a little bit better. So in general, I would say get as far as you can with diet, and if that's not working, then move to regexes, unless it's, again, something very simple. So if you know it's always going to be, a skew, which is, I don't remember what SKU stands for. It's a product identifier number that always has the same format. You know exactly what that format's going to be every time. That's fine. I would do a regex for that. But if it's like a product name, I would probably go for diet. That's just my stance.
Yeah, I think I would completely do the same. So in this case, right, if it's like M3 or M5 instead of M4, then I think diet would just generalize to that. While your regex, depending on how narrow you actually framed it, might not cover it. So yeah, definitely the better solution in this case.
And Enrique says, so this is about the problems with the TensorFlow versions and TensorFlow and on versions. You used a Debian 10 cluster template in GCP. Might be cluster template.
No, Buster is actually the Debian name, right? So for Debian 10, I think because it's like stretch, Buster. I think stretch might be 9, Buster's 10. But what's your Python version? I'd be curious about that. So the kind of the very, very brutal approach to this would go to our GitHub repository, Rasa open source, and there's a file called poetry log that this specifies all the dependencies, like literally all the dependencies which Rasa open source uses, down to the last patch version of every dependency. So this is also what we ship as part of our Docker images, and which we give out to our customers, and which also you can use. So that should kind of give you an overview on what versions to use, but it should be picked up a bit like by default usually. Yeah, the other solution just is to work around pip and use Docker. because then you got a ready-made image with all the right dependencies inside. And yeah, pip can sometimes be a bit painful, to be honest. So Docker is definitely going to work.
Yeah, I don't poetry on a very quick search, but hopefully that help answers your question.
Where did you look for? I mean, actually in the GitHub repository for Rasa, so not on the documentation.
I'm in the org.
Yeah, then you go to the Rasa repository, and then there should be poetry log. 8 days ago, update SDK to 2.1.
And I'm just doing this in a separate tab because
we actually started using poetry to manage our dependencies because it was just way more robust, especially kind of with like small version changes in dependencies of our dependencies. So we regularly had our CI crashing with issues on that, and then we solved it by using poetry. I put it in the chat, Rachel.
Oh, that's helpful. I'm still just rolling through stuff. There we go. Oh, lock. Sorry, I was looking for log, L-O-G. That is on me. I was okay, like, I just don't see it. No, that's 100% on me. I should have asked for
So this really nails every dependency to its last bit. So the kind of more pip-like equivalent would be the Pi project Tommel, which kind of defines ranges, where you can look what actually the issue is. It's weird, like I think on Debian there shouldn't be any problems with TensorFlow. So TensorFlow and I think TensorFlow text, for example, has some problems with Windows. But on Unix you should be pretty safe. So that's why I'm a bit surprised, to be honest.
Huh. Figure out what that is. Not where this is going.
Maybe it's an old Python version, to be honest. Maybe it comes by default with 2.7 for some reason.
Oh, that could be.
Or pip is using Python 2.7, but pip 3, for example, would use the right Python version. A colleague of mine was recently running into this in GitHub Actions, calling Python, and it actually failed on type annotations. Because in GitHub Actions and their latest runner, so they're now updating it, it actually was just like Python 2. Python was referring to 2.7 still, but you had to do like Python 3 actually to refer to a current version of Python.
A good one to watch out for. Avinash has, so this is more clarification on the multiple slots for the flow of the story. So question 1 is, do you have car insurance? Question 2 is, what is its premium? How to relate it to car insurance for the first query. Actually, I don't know that that is from the same question. Okay, oh, so it's about Anaphora resolution. In the second query, what is its premium? That it refers to car insurance in the first sentence.
Usually you should be kind of covered by the stories, right? So if your first intent is ask about car insurance, then kind of this would determine your further flow. If you have a very general intent, then you could try setting a slot kind of to hardcode this behavior to add this additional information rather to give it the chance to kind of distinguish on something. Yeah. I know Tanya is also working, for example, on knowledge bases, right? So this is also kind of a current research topic, which is still ongoing, I think. But current support is only experimental, I think.
also wonder if this might be a good place for entity roles. Still unheard of.
I think
Entity roles and
they're
groups. Mental. Anyway, if you're interested in entity roles and groups, this blog post introduces them. Introducing entity roles and groups on the Rasa blog from August. Don't remember if that's.
it's still experimental,
it still may be an
actually.
experimental feature.
Yeah.
It could work.
We also actually in Rasa Open Source 2.1 we kind of did an update actually to entity roles and groups. So because before that roles and groups did not affect the prediction, and now they actually affect and influence the prediction if you have a different role or group set. So still experimental, but hopefully more helpful now. Yeah.
That could be one way of storing up this information in a structured way. We probably have time for maybe one or two more questions. Chung has, I would like to do a doctorate in the future. Do you have an exciting problem from which a topic for a doctorate can be created? My general advice for people asking for research topics is that if someone else gives you a research topic, you're probably not going to be as excited about it as something that you came up with on your own. And that spark of excitement is going to be real important year 5 when you're sitting alone in your cubicle and it's a beautiful sunny day outside and you're just like looking at revisions and crying. So I'm not saying you're going to cry during a PhD, but I mean, I did. Yeah, I would say find something you're genuinely excited about and don't chase the trendy topics. Like if you don't genuinely like care a lot about language models, don't study language modeling because it's hot right now. It may not be hot in 5 years, who knows. Yeah, read a lot, see what rabbit holes you go down.
In fact, did you know that I think the Queen guitar player studied astronomy, and he did his PhD I think in 2000, like someone in the 2000s, so kind of like 30 years after starting his PhD, because there was absolutely no progress on the topic of his PhD. So he just wrapped it up a couple of years later. So yeah, don't chase the trendy topics, I guess.
No, very much not. Pranav says, when are you updating your certification workshop course on Udemy? I don't know, is my question. And I will say that there's a couple of courses on Udemy, ones that are from Rasa. Some of them are by Rasa community members, and the one that's from Rasa, Maddie Mantha is the author. So if it's not the ones that we made, the answer is never, because they're not ours. If that's helpful. And let's do maybe one more. Enrique says, thanks, I'll check. GitHub, just Python 3 pip from apt. We'll check exact Python 3 versions. This is about the mismatch with installing things.
Yeah, please create an issue for it. That should be working out of the box, because Pasta I think is also the latest version, or Stretch is the latest version. I always confuse them. But that should be definitely working. Yeah.
Oh, I think
fingers crossed.
Issue. There we go. Nope. Yes, issue. And one last question from Faiza. I tried to color a string in a custom action with print to Python terminal. It works fine, but in the Rasa shell, it doesn't make the string colored. Is it not possible in Rasa?
I know we do our own terminal formatting during Rasa shell, so this could kind of invalidate your output. The easiest approach, or like an approach, if you actually want to have your customers or users speaking to Rasa via the shell, is also that you can kind of re-implement your own input channel for the command line, and then you have full control about any coloring and how things are formatted. So that might be an option then, yeah.
So hopefully that helps. By default, it sounds like that's not gonna work. All right. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Tobias. I hope everyone found this helpful, interesting, useful. And if you have any other questions, come over to one of these is the forum. Yes, please head over to the forum and ask them there, and we'll do our best to get back to you. There will be no live streaming tomorrow or Friday. It is a holiday in the US, and I will not be at work. So if you're in the US, enjoy your holidays. Otherwise, enjoy your regular Thursday and Friday. Yeah. Stay safe, wash your hands, stay inside as much as possible. See you later. Thanks, Tobias.
Thanks.